They didn't wait a day, not even a single night after we hit 5 million active users. That morning, the office was still buzzing with leftover energy, confetti clinging to shoes, and half-deflated balloons tied to chairs. People were laughing, replaying screenshots of the numbers on the big screen. We had done it, what the company said was impossible. And then, like a knife through fabric, my name was called into the corner office. The tone was flat, rehearsed. Your position is being eliminated. Your bonus isn't going through. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. After 15 years of building their systems, after nights when I fell asleep with code still running through my head, after watching coworkers move on while I stayed to hold the foundation together, they had the audacity to tell me it wasn't personal. I walked out of that office with my keycard still warm in my hand, hearing the muffled cheer of a champagne cork popping somewhere down the hall. The celebration continued without me. On the outside, I kept my face blank. On the inside, I was torn between humiliation and fury. How could they erase me so cleanly, like I was just a shadow on the wall? But here's what they didn't know. Every server, every dashboard, every line of code they depended on, all of it ran through a clause I had written years ago. Before I tell you what happened next, where are you listening from right now? And let me ask you this. Have you ever given everything to a job only to feel invisible the moment you were no longer useful? Leave a comment if this stirs up a memory. Your story might be the one that makes someone out there feel less alone. The strange thing about getting fired is how the world outside doesn't stop. I stepped out of that corner office with a paper-thin smile, and the first thing I saw was a half-eaten cake on the break room table. The word success was written in blue icing, but someone's careless slice had cut the letters in half. All that was left was SUEs. It almost looked like a joke aimed right at me. The room was still filled with chatter. Coworkers leaned over their desks, replaying numbers on their screens, like a victory parade. Can you believe it? 5 million in a day! One of them laughed. Another clapped his hands together. We've made history! I walked past them quietly, clutching a cardboard box they had given me to collect my things. A few heads turned my way. Some offered tight, nervous smiles, the kind people give when they don't know if they should acknowledge you or look away. Most chose to keep talking, pretending not to notice me at all. It was surreal. Just hours earlier, these same people were congratulating me, patting me on the back, calling me the architect behind the launch. Now I was a ghost in the room. Their celebration went on, but my presence had already been erased, as if I was never part of it in the first place. I remember pausing at my desk, looking at the little trinkets I had collected over the years: an old coffee mug, a stress ball shaped like a server rack, a sticky note with a thank you message from an intern. Tiny reminders that once my work mattered, I placed them carefully into the box. Not because I needed them, but because I couldn't stand the thought of leaving pieces of myself behind in a place that had so quickly discarded me. And as I closed the lid, I heard someone shout from across the floor, "Where's Adriana? She should be celebrating with us." The laughter that followed was awkward, hesitant, like even they weren't sure if the words were innocent or cruel. I kept walking. My silence was the only answer I had left. But as I reached the elevator, one thought echoed in my mind. If they wanted me gone so quickly, what were they so afraid I might still do? When I got home that night, the noise of the office still rang in my ears. The laughter, the champagne corks, the hollow words of nothing personal. I set the cardboard box down on my kitchen table and stared at it like it held the weight of my entire career. But the truth was, my real legacy wasn't in that box. It lived inside the systems I had built and in the documents that no one ever bothered to read. I opened my laptop and pulled up a folder I hadn't touched in years. Contract_documents archive. To anyone else, it was just a mess of scanned PDFs and technical notes. But to me, it was the blueprint of how the company ran, line by line, clause by clause. I scrolled past the standard legal fluff until I reached one file I knew by heart, Appendix D. That appendix was my quiet rebellion years ago, back when management wanted to cut corners, outsource critical infrastructure, and treat the people behind the systems like replaceable parts. I fought them in those meetings, but words weren't enough, so I buried my resistance in writing, legal writing, a condition hidden in plain sight, linking every license to one simple factor, the employment of the designated technical lead, me. I leaned back in my chair, rereading the words I had drafted long ago. At the time, I told myself it was just a precaution, a safety net in case they ever tried to push me aside. I never imagined I'd actually need it. And yet here I was, terminated, dismissed, cut out of the very celebration I had built. While the company laughed and raised their glasses, I held in my hands a clause they had signed without blinking, a clause they had forgotten. I closed my laptop slowly, my reflection staring back in the dark screen. My pulse was steady, but my mind was racing. They thought they had erased me in a single meeting. They thought wrong, because if Appendix D still held, then time was no longer on their side. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. My phone buzzed with leftover notifications from the office group chat. Pictures of clinking glasses, captions full of exclamation points, emojis that screamed celebration. It was like the entire company had moved on overnight, and I was just a forgotten footnote. I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop. Part of me wanted to do nothing, just walk away and let them believe they had won. But another part of me, the part that had quietly written Appendix D all those years ago, refused to disappear so easily. So I took a deep breath, opened a new email draft, and kept my words painfully short. FYI, potential issue, Appendix D. 7 words. That was it. No accusations, no anger, no dramatic speeches. Just a simple reminder buried in their own paperwork. I hit send before I could overthink it. A small part of me wondered how long it would take before someone in legal noticed. Hours? Days? Or would they ignore it entirely, thinking it was just noise from a bitter ex-employee I didn't know? And honestly, it didn't matter, because I had just placed the first domino, and whether they realized it or not, it was already starting to lean. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside my window. The world didn't know what was about to happen. Neither did they. Later that afternoon, I checked my inbox. Nothing. No reply, no acknowledgement. But I wasn't discouraged. I knew how these things worked. Legal teams moved slow until suddenly they didn't. I closed my laptop, exhaling through a smile that wasn't joy, but something sharper, anticipation. They thought they had silenced me. But my silence was never weakness. It was strategy. And as I walked away from the desk, one thought followed me. If a single email could shake their foundation, what would happen when the clock kept ticking? By the second day, the silence I left behind had started to make noise of its own. I wasn't in the building anymore, but I could imagine the atmosphere. Whispers in the hallways, Slack messages with half-finished sentences, nervous glances between desks. Someone had read my email. Someone had pulled up Appendix D. I got a message from a friend still inside the company. People are asking questions. Did you really put something in the contract? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Curiosity spreads faster when you leave it unanswered. In my mind, I pictured the legal department, a group of attorneys huddled around a printed copy of the contract, scanning every line, flipping back and forth, frowning at signatures that had been forgotten for years. I could almost hear the nervous clearing of throats, the "let's not panic yet" tone they probably used to calm management. Meanwhile, the engineers, the ones who knew me best, must have started connecting the dots. They remembered the long nights, the way I pushed back against outsourcing. They remembered how protective I was of the system's backbone. And maybe, just maybe, they were starting to realize I hadn't been bluffing all those years. Outside the office, I stayed quiet. My routine looked ordinary. Morning coffee, evening walks, small conversations with neighbors. But behind closed doors, I was preparing. Backups lined up on external drives, encryption keys locked away, a quiet checklist of everything they had once taken for granted, now sitting in my hands. I didn't need to say a word. The whispers were doing my work for me. Each rumor added fuel to the uncertainty. Each unanswered question tilted the balance a little further. And by the end of that week, I knew one thing for sure. Whispers never stay whispers for long. They grow teeth. They spread. They force people to look over their shoulders. Which meant only one question remained. When those whispers finally reached the CEO's office, what would they do? It happened late on a Thursday afternoon. I opened my laptop, refreshed my inbox, and the screen blinked twice before throwing me out. Access denied. I tried again, thinking it was a glitch. But the error repeated. A moment later, Slack logged me out. The chat windows that had once buzzed with constant activity, gone. My credentials, my channels, my history, all wiped out in seconds. Then came the project dashboards. Each one I clicked kicked me out faster than the last, until the final banner appeared in red, "Your account is no longer authorized." They had cut me off. Clean, clinical, like I'd never existed. For a second, I just stared at the blank screen. And then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. This was their playbook. Erase the person, erase their access, erase their presence. Pretend it solves the problem. What they didn't understand was that removing me didn't remove the systems. Those systems had my fingerprints embedded in every layer. Every license, every dependency, every integration, they all ran through a map I had once built and tucked away for myself. 97 points of failure. 97 lines that all pointed back to me. And I still had that map. I opened the folder where it lived, scrolling through the meticulous notes I had written late at night when no one was watching. Dependencies, backups, encryption keys, fallback triggers. They thought by cutting me out, they were locking the doors. What they didn't realize was that I had built the walls. So yes, the cutoff stung. Being erased always does. But underneath the sting was something sharper, certainty. Because now they had officially crossed the line. They had made their move. And soon it would be my turn. As I closed the laptop, my phone buzzed with a message from a former teammate. "They think you're gone. But are you?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because the real answer was already on the clock, ticking down hour by hour. By Friday morning, the email I had sent was no longer just sitting quietly in someone's inbox. Word reached me through a friend inside legal had finally picked it up. And once they read Appendix D, the mood shifted. I wasn't there to see it, but I could picture the scene. A group of attorneys huddled around a conference table, paper copies spread out, highlighters bleeding yellow across the margins. Someone reading the line out loud, voice breaking just a little. "All licenses contingent upon the employment of the designated technical lead." Silence. Then the shuffle of chairs. The realization that the designated lead wasn't just a title, it was a name, my name. In that instant, I became more than an ex-employee. I became a liability. Reports started flying, managers were called into side meetings, whispers of exposure risk and potential breach echoing through the halls. My friend told me they even argued over the word employment. Did it mean active payroll? Was severance enough? Could they reinterpret the clause to save themselves? But legal language doesn't bend that easily, and they knew it. I imagined Don, my former manager, sitting in that room, sweat forming at his collar. He had signed off on my termination without thinking twice. Now, every lawyer in the building was pointing a finger his way, calling it negligence, and he couldn't undo it with an apology or a retroactive paycheck. Meanwhile, I sat at home, calm, sipping coffee, like nothing unusual was happening. On the surface, the city around me kept moving cars, honking, people rushing to work. But somewhere in the heart of San Francisco, executives were staring at contracts they had never bothered to read, realizing the trap they had built for themselves. And the best part? The clock had already started ticking. They had less than 72 hours before Appendix D spoke for itself. The only question was, how would they respond when the countdown hit 0? It started quietly, the way storms always do, a flicker on a dashboard, a delayed login, nothing dramatic, just enough for someone in operations to frown at their monitor and mutter, "That's odd." But odd things don't stay small. By 3:12 a.m., the finance dashboard froze mid-refresh. Numbers that should have been updating by the second were stuck like a photograph. At 4:27, alerts began to cascade across internal systems. Timeouts, license check failed, authentication error. By sunrise, the chatter in the office chat channels had turned from celebration to panic. I wasn't there, but I could imagine it vividly. Engineers scrambling, refreshing, rebooting. Managers pacing, trying to sound calm while asking the same useless question. Have we tried restarting it? Someone must have noticed the pattern, though. The same red banner flashing again and again. License unrecognized. Contact account holder. And I was the account holder. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee in hand, watching the first light break over San Francisco. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages, some from old teammates. Systems are crashing. Is this you? Others from unknown numbers that smelled like executives scrambling to reach me. I didn't reply. Inside the company, the panic spread faster than any outage they had faced before. Because this wasn't just a glitch, they couldn't blame a vendor or a bad line of code. The problem was structural, woven into the very contract that gave them permission to operate. The 72 hours had run their course. Appendix D wasn't a rumor anymore. It was alive, speaking louder than any email or protest I could have written. And as the morning wore on, I knew they would finally understand this wasn't about me being fired. This was about them building their empire on a foundation they didn't own. The countdown had broken. The only question left was how much damage would it leave behind before they decided to call me. By the time the sun was high over the city, desperation had already set in. Inside the company meetings turned into marathons of denial and frantic guesses. I heard later how managers kept repeating the same phrase, as if saying out loud would make it true. It's just a bug. It has to be a bug. But bugs don't come with legal footnotes attached. At 10 a.m., payroll rushed to process a special transfer. My phone buzzed with an automated message from my bank, a sudden deposit large enough to make most people pause. They thought money could glue the broken pieces back together, but Appendix D wasn't about late payments, it was about breach. And once breached, there was no undo button. I imagined the lawyers trying to explain this in a crowded room. Someone must have shouted, "Just pay her, that'll fix it." And then another voice, colder, answering, "It's too late. Retroactive payment doesn't restore compliance." Meanwhile, engineers were working like surgeons in a room without oxygen, restarting servers, spinning up new instances, writing patches that collapsed as soon as they were deployed. Every time they thought they'd found a workaround, the same red banner appeared, license unrecognized, contact account holder. And that account holder was me. At home, I watched the drama unfold from the quiet safety of my living room. My phone kept buzzing with unknown numbers. Some calls rang out, others left vague voicemails. No one dared to say too much on a recording, but I could hear the strain in their voices, the cracking composure of people who had realized they weren't in control anymore. For the first time in years, I felt the power shift. They were scrambling, and I was silent. And silence in that moment carried more weight than any argument I could have made. By evening, the company had burned through every quick fix they could think of. Nothing worked. The breach was alive, pulsing in every corner of their infrastructure. And as night fell, I knew it was only a matter of time before the phone call came, the one where they would finally stop pretending. The call came late in the evening. My phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize, but I didn't need to guess who it was. There was only one person left who hadn't tried yet. I let it ring twice before I answered. Adriana, a voice said tight but measured, the CEO. For years, he had barely spoken to me, as if people like me existed only to keep his empire running in the background. Now his tone was different, careful, almost respectful. "We need to resolve this," he said. I stayed quiet for a moment, letting the weight of his words hang. Then I asked, calm and steady, "Do you finally understand the clause?" A pause, a sigh. "We do, and we're prepared to make this right. Just tell me what you want." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the city lights flickering like static. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling. I wasn't the one begging for answers. So I gave him mine. 3 things, I said. First, full compensation for every hour I worked on the launch, plus the bonus I earned. No tricks, no loopholes. Second, full buyout of my intellectual property. The systems I built are mine until you pay for them. And third, a public statement acknowledging who made this launch possible, my name included. The line went silent. I could hear him breathing, maybe pacing, maybe glaring at some lawyer across the table. Then he asked, his voice clipped, "And if we don't?" I smiled to myself. Then the blackout stays, and every hour you wait, the cost multiplies. Another long pause. Then, reluctantly, he said, "You'll have an answer within 24 hours. I hung up before he could say more. My hands were steady, my pulse calm. The shift was complete. For the first time, the CEO of a billion-dollar company was negotiating on my terms. And as midnight crept closer, I couldn't help but wonder how far would they be willing to go to buy back the power they had thrown away. The next morning, I didn't set an alarm. I woke up naturally, the city already alive outside my window. Somewhere across town, I knew board members were pacing in glass offices, investors were dialing into calls that began with apologies, and engineers were still glued to frozen dashboards. But in my apartment, it was quiet, peaceful. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. For years, I had lived in constant motion, patching crises, running overnight deployments, being the invisible safety net no one ever thanked. Now, with the systems in blackout, I had nothing urgent to fix. Ironically, my silence was the loudest move I had ever made. The phone buzzed throughout the morning. Unknown numbers, short, desperate voicemails. "Adriana, please call us back. We're ready to negotiate. The board needs confirmation you're willing to..." I let them pile up, one after another, a chorus of panic filling my inbox. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because silence has its own power. Every minute they didn't hear from me, their anxiety grew. Every hour that passed with systems offline, their stock price bled, their credibility shrank, and their empire cracked just a little more. I thought about all the times I had been overlooked, dismissed, treated as if my work was just background noise. Now, my absence was deafening, and for once, they couldn't ignore me. By the afternoon, my friend inside the company sent a single message. "They're falling apart. Investors want blood. Don looks like he hasn't slept in days." I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. It wasn't joy I felt. It was justice. Quiet, steady, undeniable justice. As the sun dipped lower, I opened my notebook and began writing, outlining exactly what I would say when they came back to me with their final offer. The terms were clear, the leverage absolute. But as I set the pen down, another thought crossed my mind. What if I pushed it further? What if I didn't just win back what was mine, but reshaped everything they thought they controlled? The call finally came the next evening. This time, there was no arrogance in their voices, no carefully rehearsed lines, just exhaustion and surrender. The board had approved my terms, compensation buyout, and public recognition. A statement went out under the company's name, crediting me for the launch that had carried them to their biggest milestone. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even feel triumphant. What I felt was steady, like the balance had finally shifted back to where it should have been all along. Inside the company, some leaders resigned quietly, hoping to slip away before the full weight of their choices caught up with them. Don, the manager who fired me, was nowhere to be found. Maybe he was pushed out, maybe he left on his own. Either way, his silence said enough. As for me, I walked away, not as the forgotten employee they had tried to erase, but as the architect who held the blueprint all along. I had no desire to return. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. Looking back, the real victory wasn't in the money or the acknowledgement. It was in the reminder that power doesn't always look loud or obvious. Sometimes it lives in the fine print, in the details no one bothers to read, in the patience to stay quiet until the right moment comes. And maybe that's the lesson here. Never underestimate the value of what you build, even if others can't see it. Because one day, the very thing they dismissed might be the thing they can't live without. So I'll leave you with this. Have you ever been underestimated only to realize later you held more power than they thought? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there might need to hear it.